Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Code. If you see, we have a special guest. Okay, we have a special guest today because we thought you would probably be tired of, listening to the three amigos saying lots of bullshit. So we decided to actually bring someone who understands about this. If you recall from our last episode, we stopped talking about the orchestration layer. So, for today, we have a very interesting set of topics regarding architecture. But before we go into that, if you don't recall, or you probably do, but you don't care anyway, I'm Armando. On top of me, it's Miguel. On my right side, it's Ruben, and our special guest from OutSystems, the one and only Francisco Menezes. Let's give him a round of applause.
Yeah, round of
Yay!
applause.
Hey guys. So
So,
Armando, you are so mistaken if you think that I'm not going to bullshit too.
no, that's okay.
Oh, then we're four amigos then.
Okay.
Let's call the whole thing off. We thought he was going to raise the intellectual level of the program, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But first things first, Francisco, give us a small introduction about yourself, or actually for anyone that might not know the architecture guru that you are.
We are
So,
not worthy.
Okay. No, yeah, you're starting to bullshit. Okay, so very short version. And I'm in without systems for around 18 years, so it's a lifetime. I almost forgot all the previous jobs, but I started in the university as a researcher and teacher. But for the last 18 years, this is my life. It's OutSystems. I drink OutSystems. I live OutSystems. I love OutSystems. I'm very enthusiastic about OutSystems. So please don't start talking bad things about OutSystems. I will have to get
Our guest
really.
will be.
But anyway, and during my lifetime in OutSystems, I was very attached to helping customers on services, expert service, so on and so forth. And very soon, I found out that we needed some laws because there was no laws around these balls. Well, let's circles.
The balls are out, guys. The balls are out.
I'm sorry. To rule all these circles, and as you know, the universe needs rules. And the thing is, I really felt the call to put some order in the initial chaos because we were not guiding people to properly use the platform, and I had a lot of horrible experiences. But we can elaborate later. But that's it. So I've been an expert in architecture. Recently, I'm no longer in that role, and actually, I very recently assumed a new position in the community. So now I'm managing the EMEA advocacy and evangelism, uh, and of course, after a small stop to deliver my fourth child, so it's a new reborn for me, this new era. But architecture always played a big part in my heart, and my mission, one of my missions in life, it's to easy things for developers, and we still have some ground to cover in order to make sure that architecture becomes a democratic thing that anyone can deliver properly without having to get trained or to get formally trained.
Mhm.
Okay, but
okay.
that's it.
Okay, actually, you mentioned that you just delivered your fourth product now, so we can assume that you are now, and that actually we know from inside information that you just turned 45, correct?
Yes.
So,
45. Okay.
Plus
Yeah,
one.
it's 45,
Actually,
right?
actually, well, I don't give a beep to my age, but what happens is that it's funny because I reach an age that I can round to the decimals, and I can say that I'm approximately 60
Mhm.
for the
So
first time.
Okay, so that puts you as 50 something, right?
Well, above 55. Otherwise, I
Yeah.
could not round. I could not round to the
It's like
60.
ceiling rather than yeah, than round. Yeah.
Yeah, he looks younger. Miguel, you
So
look
but
like you're 80.
Yeah.
it does look much younger. And
Well,
it's
I have two with two small kids. I cannot look like a grandfather. I need to look like a young father.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And but you were well. If you count obviously the four material children, there's the immaterial, which probably I'm cutting off because I think does this sound good? There's an immaterial child that all our systems developers live with, which is like the four-layer canvas, which I believe was making it concrete some of the stuff that you mentioned about. Do you want to share a little bit what was like the point where you needed to
Mhm.
formalize, and where did you
Yeah,
borrow ideas from to make the four-layer canvas?
yeah,
So,
absolutely.
with who you made love to create it? Basically, that's
Yes,
the question.
Well, I would say with the universe because everything is determined since the Big Bang. So,
yeah, the Big Bang. I see what you did there.
but anyway, but okay, let me elaborate a little bit. So, as you know, being a visual tool, it was very easy in the beginning. People starting to use OutSystems and just dragging circles
Balls.
around, and not worrying about abstracting and architecture. And very soon, and I felt that myself. Even I was abusing of the free usage of the OutSystems resources. And the thing is, when you get serious, at a certain point, you get a lot of extra costs and unwanted management tasks just to keep your code because you end up with a spaghetti architecture. And so when I was kind of setting up the practices for the services, then I started elaborating and came up with the four-layer canvas, which, as I said, it was not my invention. It was predetermined. So I just had to kind of reuse the best practice that we were already using and the industry and start abstracting. Service-oriented architecture was a big thing in the early 2000s. So there was already a natural thinking about abstracting concepts that can be reused, services that can be reused. And of course, there was also in the industry some layered architecture where people tend to put interfaces on top, then the database in the middle, and all sort of infrastructure services below. But even that approach was not in seen field is was that in some big factories, big software factories, people ended up having, even if they were trying to have some architectural concerns, they ended up having huge monoliths with tons of tables and rules, and then it was very difficult to evolve, maintain applications because there were bottlenecks. And in the early days, because we evolved a lot, the .system product evolved a lot, but in the early days, dependencies were very costly. And as you know, all the nightmares of updating references, refreshing, so on and so forth. So having no concerns in architecture was defeating the promise of fast delivery. Because if you do a toy application, it's easy. You don't worry about anything. You drag those circles and you put everything together, and that's it. You have a MVP, or you have a POC, or you have a demo, whatever. But after a while, uh, the entire promise of fast delivery, it's ruined because
Mhm.
you end up having a lot of work just refactoring and just evolving, and sometimes to evolve something you have strange dependencies with other teams due to wrong dependencies, so on and so forth. So that was basically it. That's why we started having. And then when I was creating patterns, I ended up having 4 layers. Okay. I don't know if you want me to elaborate on that already,
No,
because
no, but actually, I had a question. You
yes,
mentioned
sure.
spaghetti code. What
Yes.
was the most eccentric scenario that you have come across? Like the
Well,
best
I,
or
I
the
came
worst, actually. That's the best one.
I came
Worst.
across several. I cannot name.
Now, to protect the innocent or the not so
Yeah.
innocent, as it turns out. But
Well,
that's okay.
but I can start with myself, because when we were at a certain point, I was managing our application IT, and being a house full of engineers, we suffered of a big disease, which was everyone was doing match rooms. So everyone was doing small pieces of software. So we did not add citizen developers. We had business developers on business positions, or doing marketing, doing engineering, or whatever. And everybody was contributing, and we were suffering from that disease, in the sense that we were gluing stuff that were not correctly designed. And at a certain point, it was so difficult to just shut down shut off the backlog, because every time we wanted to turn some how do you say, not a
Screw.
nail, screw, yes, thank you. Every time you wanted to screw something in one module, it had horrible impacts on others. But of course, in some customers, and very early, I was involved in a lot of architectures with customers, not designing initially, mostly helping the customers uh, to unveil the spaghetti, because they were complaining, oh, our system is not working. This takes hours and hours to deploy something. We have very costly governance just to deploy things, because we have to have all the teams aligned, and so on and so forth. And then looking at those situations and coming up with the patterns and good practices, that this quickly evolved in the 4-layer canvas, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
but you asked some examples. Well, we had some examples. We back in the 2000s already, with 80 developers, several teams, and with the cows completely installed, and
Like
and
time of deployment or something like that. Can you
yes,
like
yes,
share us?
exactly. Time of the more than 8 hours just to deploy, because every time you wanted just to evolve something, it could be just a business application, but because of unmanageable dependencies, you always had to sync everything and deploy everything, right?
Mhm.
And we had sort of everywhere, and this is not local. So our first big customers started here in Portugal, but then in the Netherlands, I also faced a lot of architectural problems in customers, and some order was necessary. And the thing is, it's easy to use the platform, but there's no guidance. So there was this need for guidance, right?
Mhm.
And the 4-layer canvas was the first principles drawn in a piece of paper. And then following those principles, we start having some tools. And today you have the architecture dashboard, which is
Mhm.
already discovering a lot of architecture problems. And the goal was always to try to help people to design correctly without having them to learn upfront. Well,
Mhm.
that's my goal.
Yeah.
Today, we still have to learn architecture, but my goal, one of my goals in life, is that we should not have to teach architecture. This should come natural as you design with the platform, in form of wizards, recommendations, or even avoiding wrong doing with the platform, and so on and so forth. And and of course, then we started with the discovery tool as the first materialization of the canvas,
Mhm.
to monitor, to get some hints how to solve it. Of course, as a first approach, that was too maybe too technical, because it was complaining about references instead of complaining about the right problems, which then came with the trust advisor.
And
And
basically, I get, for example, now people who join the community, they get this network of concepts. So, like we were talking about the 4-layer canvas being like vertical slicing of responsibilities, but you also sort of mentioned even within the same layer, people could have like a straight monolith that covered all the core, so that
exactly.
need to be sliced also horizontally. And then there's these tools, and now people that join, they kind of see the whole package, but presumably effectively this was a very iterative process, and
Yes.
these discoveries were rolled out as they got augmented, right, over a period
Exactly.
of time, until software actually like discovery came
Mhm.
to make it even more visual, right?
Exactly. Actually, you just mentioned the relation across the same layer. Well, maybe for some viewers, I don't know if everybody knows about 4-layer canvas, but let me just elaborate a little bit about 4-layer canvas. If you think about the life cycle of your modules, what is perceived as an application by a customer or a user is the application with the interface. That's what they
Mhm.
see, right? So we had to isolate the end user modules, because those are the ones that are subject to life cycles. The sponsors, the business sponsors, they want a new version of the application, new screens, whatever. So those end user modules, they typically live by them. They should be independent from each other. So if you have an application for the human resources, and for instance, for fulfilling requesting vacations or expenses, whatever, that that application should not depend on another application for the financial team, right? But of course, then to support in terms of business rules, entities, you may have common stuff. So the end user layer, it's where you provide all the interfaces, but you should not provide services, because you don't want this each human resource application be dependent of a financial application, because they need to have their independent life cycles. But at a certain level, they could be both be using the concept of an employee, right? And the employee, is a service, so it's in the core. It's a core concept. So there was this need to isolate the core concepts around entities that will persist the data, business rules around those entities, so on and so forth. And then why did we need the third layer, the last layer, which is it used to be called library layer. Now it's foundation layer for a couple of years, just to redraw any confusion with libraries, because that's not only for libraries. That's for all sort of code, services, libraries, whatever, that supports the applications, but it's not business related. If you have some UI widgets, or if you have a Google Map, or if you have an integration service to an external system, or if you want to manage users, users is not a business concept. Users is an application concept. All those concepts, they need to be isolated in the lower layer. And why isolated? Because those are highly reusable, and I want to make sure that they don't depend on business concepts, and even less on end user concepts, right?
Mhm.
Now, the big question is, what about the orchestration?
Yeah,
Why?
because I was going to say the end user. You mentioned three, and there's
Yeah.
always like it's 3 plus 1.
No,
So
yeah,
we're
no,
getting
no,
to the.
yeah.
Yeah. I was
Yeah,
going to say like
tell
we
us a
should
little
have
bit.
shared some ideas what we
No,
wanted
no,
to
no.
talk with Chic.
Now,
Yeah,
the
he's
thing is,
just cutting through the ideas, right?
okay. What's the next question? What is
So,
the
does
orchestration
anyone
layer,
want to
right?
ask something formal? Go for it, Ruben. Ask formally the question.
I
So,
left
so,
I left the orchestration for the end.
Francisco. Oh, yes. So we in the last podcast we were talking about the death of the orchestration
Okay.
layer. Can
Okay.
you explain us
First, the
Yes.
what
birth.
is all about?
Yeah, first the birth of why
Exactly.
is it indeed, and then why does it has
Yeah.
its time?
Okay, so I was telling this story with the first three layers, and I left this to the end to explain that the fourth layer was required just to fix some limitations of the platform. And the main limitation was the fact that destinations, so screen destinations, when you reference destination, was considered a strong reference. So by a strong reference, it means that if you change some producer, so if I'm exposing a destination and someone is consuming me, every time I change the producer, it was complaining about all the other consumers, right? And as I mentioned before, the main let's say modules that should be independent from each other are the end users. So if we did not add the orchestration layer on top, and it's very normal that you end up having links, URLs across end users, right? And that would cause this unwanted dependency. So we had to come up with extra layer, the orchestration layer, where you would isolate all the cross application references, mainly destinations. So, for instance, if you have a portal with several applications, where would you put your dashboards or your end user landing pages or role based ending landing pages, right? So if I'm a manager, I enter my portal and I see the requests I need to answer, the main events, whatever, in different applications. There should be a module where I can put those cross application screens that then they show me something based on logic that is supported by some core module. But when I interact with those landing pages, I start jumping to specific applications, right?
So it's kind of a coat hanger.
It's yeah, it was every time you needed to orchestrate several applications or merge several end users, you would have to create this extra layer, and that also forced us to advocate as best practice something that always I never liked to force people to do that, but which was the menus. The menus, they are typically supplied by the style guide or the team, right? And the menus, because they are application support, they are not business related, they are application support, they are in the foundation layer, they would have to have external URLs to avoid those upward references to screens, right? And so and another reason for the orchestration, which is also related to destinations being strong, is whenever you had to create a workflow, a BPT. Whenever you have a BPT, and sometimes you have cross application BPTs because you create these applications. Maybe for a certain role you have the manager application, then you have the operation application, whatever, and then you do a BPT with different end user activities. You would have to create destination, and in that case, you could not use external URLs, or you could, but it would be very cumbersome, right? So again, that was another reason to have the orchestration layer, because you could create these cross application workflows and use destinations below to the end user modules, right? Now, why is orchestration layer dead? Because when with 10 or 11, with 11, sorry, with version 11, destinations are no longer strong references. I don't know if you were aware of that. So why complicate this, right? So now you can have two end users doing a reference side by side, and if you think about it, it's just a URL. Why, if I'm linking through a URL, why should I need to bring that code along every time it changes or whatever, right? So now destinations, they are no longer strong dependencies; they are loosely coupled references. So there's no need to complicate things, and so now you can have cross application links. You can have even workflows. If you want, you can leave the workflows in the right place. For me, the right place for a workflow is in the core layer, because workflow is all about business rules, right?
Mhm.
And the workflow, you design the logic of a workflow, and then you can have destinations above, because now I don't care about destinations. And that's basically it. If you are
Okay.
using version 11, we don't look at destinations at all.
Okay, but actually, it's a good point that you mentioned. But under the hood, that also means that the IntelliSense or the validation of the codes, um, is it still validating? Because one of the reasons why it was a strong references was because to assure that if you change, for example, you put parameters
Okay,
for the screen, or if you choose change the name of the screen, that would be reflected, or you had to update the references.
okay,
But if now they are weak references, what does it
yeah.
mean under the hood?
So they are a weak reference, but anyway, they are subject to all those checkings. So if you break some API, if you break the signature, you can. There are a lot of non-breaking changes. So if you add an extra optional parameter, that's okay. If you break, the IDE will complain about broken references, right? But it's just to force you to refresh. But in your normal evolution of application, you're not breaking every day. So what you're typically doing is you're changing the screens, not the. But if you want, you can change. And if you consider that okay, but I don't want to have dependencies on the other consumers of this destination, then you should always consider making a non-breaking change. So if you need an extra parameter, just make it optional. Of course, if you need to change the name, then you might have a problem. But it's not a big problem because and the platform will automatically refresh these references. It's not forcing you to republish everything and so on and so forth. So basically, what would be the justification to explain, hey, you need to isolate in the orchestration layer screens with cross reference to other screens and whatever, if, if that's no longer a problem, right?
Mhm. Yeah, and but I remember that for as you mentioned, this was introduced in 11. This kind of loosening up of references, or the kind of most adaptable changes. But for a long period, the discovery, which is the de facto standard for validating this,
Mhm.
still fired it up, right? But
Well,
now that's been addressed.
actually, no. Actually, if you're using Discovery on a version 10, it will fire up those. It will complain. But if you're using it on version 11, it will not
but
care
but only
about it.
more recent discovery versions, right? For a period, even on
Uh-huh.
11, discovery still complained.
Yeah, probably. But
Okay.
I would say for probably 2 years now that we have a version that does not complain about destinations if you're
Are you
using version
sure?
11.
I would say it's probably like 2 months actually, because
Come on.
I'm pretty certain that's in the change log, a very
Aren't you
recent change
sure
log.
that you were using an updated version from 10?
Uh, well, I guess not, but I can triple check.
Well, let me think about it. So I left the practices in early 2019,
Hmm.
and I believe when I left the practices, that was already in place.
I was under the impression that it took a while for the this intention to make its way to discovery.
I
Well,
still think it was
I'm not.
Miguel's fault.
Well,
Yeah, it's probably bugging me.
I'm convinced that in early 2019 that was already relaxed, but I cannot be sure
Okay, but
because
it's definitely
another
there.
alternative is that already recommended, and I strongly I thought that it was already implemented, and maybe it took some time. But anyway,
All right, cool.
Okay. Actually, I have a pop-up question that came to my mind. So imagine the following scenario. You come to an interview and someone is turning to you. So, yeah, Francisco, I looked at your CV and so on. So you know some things about architecture. In 30 seconds, tell me what are the don't do in the three-layer canvas.
okay. Well, so assuming that now you already respected the three layers, there are still things that you should not do. And one was already mentioned, like creating monoliths, because it's all about
15 seconds missing.
okay, it's all about the life cycle. So abstracting concept is a must, right? And when I say abstracting concept, is that
5 seconds.
just because you have two layers, it doesn't mean that you a good architecture you just have a end user, a core, and a foundation. I can elaborate more if you do extra questions or extra time.
So I think the time
So
was past.
that would
Thank
be
you
the
for
single most
coming.
that would be the single most important rule that you'd still stick and reinforce. Like, still don't make the monoliths.
Yes, still don't make the monoliths. But here you have another flavor to add here. Whether even if you split concepts, should they be strongly related or loosely coupled? Which is another question that you might do. uh,
So,
but
Herman,
Yeah,
I'm sorry, Herman, you are way too quiet. Are
yeah.
Yeah,
I
you
was I
ignorant
was
in terms of
he's
thinking
normally
architecture?
a very quiet guy, but
I
today
was
is.
thinking if you were attending the interviews that I usually make, because I don't ask them to explain the don'ts in 30 seconds. I ask them to explain me the four-layer canvas in 2 minutes or less.
Ah, well,
Okay.
I also make that question, but I give people more time.
Nah, nah. 2 minutes or less to explain is perfectly enough. Okay. Then I just ask
Okay.
them to, oh, so get me this problem and design me the modules using the four-layer canvas.
Uh-huh.
And like 95% of the times they just go with the monolith approach.
okay,
Okay, interesting.
if you let me elaborate a little bit more about what do I mean with abstraction. And abstraction is not mixing two concepts, and sometimes the concepts are strongly related, but if you think that they can live by themselves, in the sense that I can have my own consumers, I can have my own consumers, so if I mix both, I'm forcing a consumer of concept A also to get concept B and be impacted by concept B. So if you think about the life cycle, and whatever you expose, the API of each model needs to be carefully thought. Well, carefully, but it doesn't mean that you need to invest a lot of time. It's just adopting some good principles. Like, for instance, you should never expose entities. They should be exposed read only. Well, you should expose entities, but read only, to make sure that you abstract all the logic for the transactions, and you don't allow people to directly consume the built-in operations. Even when you do business rules, you should abstract those rules. So give meaningful names to the public elements, public actions, or public or server actions, or whatever, that capture the use case that you need. What is the type of transaction, where it will be used, and try to avoid as much as possible, because that's another cause for some spaghettis when you start using, because you know the internals. Oh, there's an auxiliary action here. Let's expose and start using, and then you get a lot of unmanageable dependencies still, even if you respect the no upward reference, no cycle, so on and so forth. And the wrong abstractions, it's a very often case that I find. And when I say abstractions, it could be transactions, so business actions. It could be even UI patterns. You should never force people to have complex inputs where they need to make calculations, input those values. No, you provide them base and do the calculations yourself inside the UI widget. And abstraction is a key aspect, and that will allow you to create independent and easily manageable independent modules without forcing to drag a lot of code.
I have a well. Actually, I don't have a question. We have a viewer that has a question. Okay, we have
Oh, oh.
a. Ooh. Well, actually, we have a question and a comment. The comment is for you, Ruben. So you stop shooting. Okay. But Paulo is asking and talking about the monoliths. How do you approach? How should you approach the process of breaking monoliths?
Okay, so there are two possible questions here. Either at design time, how you should design, and the other one is how you should refactor if you already have a monolith, right? So in the exercise of designing the architecture, important step is discovering all the concepts, right? And if you discover all the concepts, of course you don't need to discover everything up front, because architecture is a live thing, and as the application evolves, new concepts will pop up and so on and so forth. But anyway, at least give a minute to think about the main business concepts, so you identify them up front as much as possible, so you avoid later on adding those in the same monolith, because that's what typically happens, is that if you don't think about the concepts up front, and normally you're dedicating an upfront time for architecture, maybe it's a different role as an architect doing that, but later on the developers will start putting code every now I need a new concept, or let's put the table in this space because this is this space, this is the module I'm editing, so on and so forth. So if you identify the concepts, then you can reason about those concepts. Are they related or not? If they are not related, it's easy, don't mix them. If they are related, then you have to, but how related? Do they share the same life cycle? For instance, the typical example I give is like you have a customer concept and a contract. Of course, the contract will point to a customer. You could say a customer and contract, they belong to this CRM module, whatever, right? Mm-hmm. But if you have a lot of consumers of customers that they will not care about contracts, why mixing them? Because you can have dependence. You can have a contract depending on the module customer, but if you don't mix them, you're promoting the correct granularity. Yeah, and the correct granularity. So this is how I always advise: think about the major concepts, not at least the master entities, right? To avoid the monoliths. Now, if you already have a monolith, then you are
screwed.
Screwed. Screwed is good.
and then the process of pulling entities out is worse than pulling teeth out, right?
Exactly. This is something that we still need to fix in the platform. I'm a fighter for that cause, but yes. But of course, if you need to do it, because and that was one of the nightmares when Ruben was asking what kind of situation I found. And for instance, I had a situation in a customer where all the tables were in a single module with hundreds of tables, with hundreds of public actions. And then they had a lot of split applications for different purposes, but they were all prisoner of that monolith, right? And that was a huge investment in breaking, undertaking to break it. And of course, there are some tricks. I should not publicize them publicly here, but you probably already heard about
it. If they probably break the platform, then you should not.
Yes. Otherwise the OutSystems community managers come after us and they shut us down. They have big tentacles.
So my advice is takes at least a couple of hours designing things up front before you start putting everything in the same place, because I've seen people very happy when they talk with me. Hey, we are using the 4-layer canvas. This is, and then I see everything in a single core module. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Actually, we have been talking a lot about architecture, and time is running out in a little bit, I would say, but still, like, there are so many questions, and like,
I still have a wild card question.
Oh,
a wild card.
You wanna go?
Question.
I mean, I feel that I'm asking too many things.
No,
you wanna
okay.
go?
I can stay for the end.
Okay, so mobile.
Yeah, okay.
Sometimes when we are talking about architecture and all of the articles and so on, they are very much focused in mobile. And now with the advent of PWA in the platform, sorry, OutSystems are reactive web applications. So with the advent of these, first of all, what do you think that it will be the effect that it will have in the architecture, if any? And second would be, I would like you to approach mobile. Talk to us about mobile architecture.
Okay, so first of all, I don't think it will affect the principles, because what you're creating in an extra layer, separating what is client-side and what is server-side, but you need to follow the same rules, in the sense that if you're doing a PWA or any mobile application, you have the device side or the client side code that can also benefit from the same principles while putting all the everything in a monolith module when you can separate the logic from the screens, and the logic might even be reused by different mobile modules, right? So the principles are the same, right? The extra consideration is the fact that you are working in a mobile application or PWA or whatever, but you need to sync data, or you need to make transactions centrally. So what will happen is that typically you have the backend system that also follows the for canvas, maybe without end user, but you typically have at least some back office to manage the backend. But and then you have the communication between the mobile and the server side. That's the key aspect of doing the architecture with mobile, because you need to take into consideration that you should not rely into many calls to the server side during a transaction. Otherwise, the experience will suck. All the concerns around what to cache locally, making sure that you're just optimizing. You don't need to have a normalized database model. You are optimizing to the user experience, to the use cases. And maybe on the other side, on the server side, you have a complex database model, which is probably supporting other web applications, other mobile applications, whatever. So most of the architecture concerns are on this connection.
But shouldn't that be reflected like in the canvas or anyhow? Because at the moment we have, of course, best practices that people like Miguel Vicente and so many other people throughout, like Armando Gomes also when writing posts and so on, that people say. But the question is like, there's no place where you actually plan it or you make it visual.
No, actually, there is maybe not so visual. Let me explain what I'm saying. Because at a certain point, we started investing in Trusted Advisor, in the sense that Trusted Advisor would pop up the recommendations, the good practice, including in mobile, and not so much putting everything visually in the discovery tool. And as I mentioned before, for instance, let me give you an example. The discovery tool will show you those violations, right? And for instance, if you have an end user module providing services, maybe you have a lot of consumers, let's say 50 consumers, doing upward references, side references, like you have 50 violations, but actually you just have one. The end user module should not be providing service. So there's only one recommendation. Hey, don't provide service. And that's the shift that we made with Trusted Advisor. Trusted Advisor tries to give you the source of the problem instead of showing that you have wrong dependencies, right? And the source of the problem is just only one. You should not be providing service. And so the mobile part, and we evolved a lot of recommendations for the mobile, but they were incorporated in Trusted Advisor, which today became, oh, I should not be talking about Trusted Advisor. I'm so sorry. I'm attached to the history because it's architecture dashboard.
Okay, that's actually
architecture dashboard is the
official name.
Yeah, that's the thing that.
For this event, because Trusted Advisor evolved into the architecture dashboard. Go ahead, please, Mr.
I'm sorry that I'm actually asking so many questions, but something that I many times I just feel myself super ignorant regarding architecture, because it's like there are so many tools like the Discovery, the Trusted Advisor, the Architecture Planner.
There's only one architecture dashboard. You mentioned architecture planner. That's forbidden.
I don't think he actually did, right?
No, he did.
This one's on you, Francisco.
No, he did. He did.
Did you?
I saw nothing.
Let's rewind.
Yes, you can rewind. He did.
But now that you mentioned it,
I'm not totally sure.
Oh, right, Ruben, you managed not to get us sued.
No, well, okay, go ahead.
So tell us a little bit about Architecture Planner, or what you can tell us.
Yes, I can tell you everything, but I just want to make sure that everybody understands that this is not an OutSystems tool, right?
Mm-hmm.
and that's the important message here, because if people start asking to our product management or whatever, when architecture planner is actually another experiment that I'm doing with my advocate colleagues uh, in order to test if something that will conduct the architecture process for you or will help you will avoid you not only doing bad practices, but will also help you doing the correct design without formally teaching you architecture up front, right? And so we made this as an experiment, and we are testing it on the field with very limited access, right? Because otherwise, this becomes if for some reason this becomes viral, then I have another problem, because now support will complain, product management will go, who are you? Are you the shadow engineering? So, right? So, but I'm counting with the community support to prove that value, so I can have a good narrative and a good argument to then evolve this into something, right?
Yeah. And we have a history of that. I mean, like Discovery was a grassroots
Yeah.
project,
Yes.
and well, Silk UI was a grassroots project. So a lot of the times, I think
Yeah,
from
trusted advisor, which
yeah,
is now architecture dashboard.
planner, yeah. So cool.
But the main objective of the architecture planner is, as I mentioned, help people design the architecture without having to invest in an architecture course up front, because I believe that we should fulfill the promise that it's easy to develop in health systems, and being easy to develop in health systems is not doing the toy application. It's also designing correctly, designing the big applications, the enterprise grade applications. Yeah.
And it's interesting that you mentioned this, because last year I was talking with an architect from Mendix, and in the past he had worked quite a few years back with OutSystems. And you, Francisco, I think you know who I mean. And he was actually saying one thing that is, in his viewpoint, very commendable of OutSystems is that the investment that OutSystems does in the architectural matters, in the discussion on the 4-layer canvas. He said that the same kind of pure principle drive for architecture, that he did not see it quite as much in the other technology that he's now espousing. So he knew you, Francisco, as being kind of a little bit one of the forefathers of pulling these things that sometimes can be left a little bit in academia, but there's good reason for them to exist, and putting them back in the center field for people to actually create good solid application, not just quick code.
Okay, it's good to know that there are good people also on the other side.
No, he was sort of saying,
The other side is only go.
I wish this added preoccupation was visible in this case in the Mendix grassroots community. I don't know, I cannot validate, but that was his words.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Guys, I think we are kind of running out of time.
Yeah, I think we already ran out of time.
Yeah, we need to wrap up, but maybe we need to bring our special guest for a second round, because I think there's so much more to be said. But before we go, I have a wild card question.
The Trump question.
Okay.
So I usually ask this question to people. Our viewers know, and the common belief is that our guest Francisco is a kind of a guru of the architecture in terms of the OutSystems platform. So, if you had to recommend an architecture book that would be kind of applicable to relating the common patterns with OutSystems patterns, which one would you recommend?
Oh my God, that's a tough question, because I never thought about it. My God. Well, let me do some homework first. I promise I'll come. But the reason why I because I never we evolved the architecture in a very organic way, adding good practices. And it was not so much based on some existing framework. It was always to solve and come up with the best solution, knowing how the platform works behind the scenes, right? So that's a tough question because I don't actually have a kind of a reference that say, oh, this is very similar. But of course, we because this is at the end of the day, this is a development tool. You can come up with all the typical patterns, architectural patterns, and there's a bunch of patterns that actually I learned a lot from customers, partners on the field. Every time I was involved in something to solve a problem, and there is a lot of bright people everywhere, architects, and I learn a lot from those guys. For instance, you can use the common query CQRS pattern, let's say, that I learned on the field, right? And of course, then I started reading, and we developed some patterns around how to properly cache information in our systems when we integrate with other systems, and so on and so forth. So you can actually apply any type of patterns, but if you look at the four-layer canvas itself, it was the fruit of working with the platform, not so much something that I can say, okay, but of course, but that's a very good question, and it's my fault that I was not prepared. But I'm only human. I can assume my weakness.
And now you know, viewers, that this show isn't scripted. Otherwise, you would have like,
Oh
like
yeah.
our Portuguese president. He would have
Or
like a list
maybe
of.
we script this part.
Oh, so because yeah,
Yeah.
ability is a good thing, right? So we scripted the. Oh, I don't know. Let me think about it.
Or he's
Yeah,
just
but
doing that to come back.
actually, it could be a good topic for it maybe to write a book about,
Oh yeah,
Oh yeah.
Francisco.
cool.
Well, that's actually something that I've thought about it several times.
All right, you
So,
heard it here first, folks.
Yeah. Yeah.
If he ever writes a book, we're gonna put a link underneath, and we get 10 cents out of each copy, right? So we're gonna update the link in 20 years when he finally finishes the book, right?
Well, yeah, that's
okay, I think that
that's
is
a
really
good
time
Perfect.
a
for
good
us to wrap up.
sponsorship.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So at some point, I guess we'll need to invite Francisco again to join us for another
If you
bout of
want. Only if you
this.
want.
Yes, I'll be very glad to do it.
All right.
Okay.
So
Okay, guys.
I'll sign off first. So thanks everyone, and especially Francisco for attending, and everyone that's listening in. Still, 50 odd minutes on, and see you next time.
See you next time,
Okay,
people. Bye bye.
Okay.
yeah.
Bye bye. Thank you, Francisco. Hey.
Yeah, no, I was just going to mention that I'm a big fan of the microservice Martin Fowler. So if you want a reference, that could be
Martin
a good one.
Fowler. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Ah.
Yeah, I forgot about it. I was thinking about the canvas, not okay, but
And with
we are
that
done, right?
bombshell,
And on that bombshell.
oh, I hope we don't get sued for this.
Yep. Okay.
All right.
Thank you, people.
Okay,
Thank you,
it was a
Francisco.
pleasure.
Bye bye.
Thank you.